What would it be like to wake up in the most luxurious mansion on Fifth Avenue? The sheets beneath your back are the finest Chinese silk of that era. The ceiling rises over 9 meters, painted with angels and clouds more expensive than an ordinary house. The walls are covered in antique French tapestries, the fireplace large enough to roast an entire cow. But you cannot move freely. A steel bar clamps tightly along your spine. Another presses across your forehead. You are only 10 years old, and this torture is not punishment, but training. That was the life of Consuelo Vanderbilt. Born into the richest family in America, raised like a future queen, yet with no right to decide her own life. At 18, she walked down the aisle in tears, marrying a duke she did not love in a deal worth millions of dollars. On the surface, it was a fairy tale, but in truth, it was a golden prison built by her own mother. How did the richest girl in America become the most beautiful prisoner inside her own gilded cage? To understand what happened to Consuelo, we have to go back to where everything began, in the glittering but ruthless world of New York during the Gilded Age. A child, born in silk, raised in fear. The Vanderbilt family was not old money. They were new money, the newest of them all. And the Vanderbilts, despite their immense wealth, were still seen as too close to the working class, too flashy, too desperate for recognition. So the family decided to change all of that. They began planning their assault on New York society. And the pawn to carry out that plan was none other than Consuelo Vanderbilt. She was born on March 2nd, 1877, into a family whose wealth exceeded all limits. From the moment she entered the world in 1877, her life was shaped less by affection than by expectation. The Vanderbilt fortune could buy anything, but what it demanded in return was control. And nowhere was that control more absolute than in the hands of her mother, Alva Vanderbilt, one of the most formidable iron-willed women in history. From a young age, Consuelo was not truly raised, but rather molded. Her posture was corrected with a steel frame strapped from her spine to her forehead, forcing her body into the exact shape her mother desired. Mistakes were punished. If Consuelo spoke even a single word out of line, that domineering mother would not hesitate to strike her with a riding crop. The family mansion on Fifth Avenue, built to rival European palaces, gradually became more of a training ground than a home. Every movement was watched. Every gesture was refined. Alva even openly declared that she would think for her daughter, so her daughter would not have to think. Consuelo's beauty, poise, and future were treated as assets to be polished and deployed, not as personal traits for her to enjoy or discover. Alva had a very clear vision of where her daughter belonged, and it certainly was not beside an American husband without a title. Consuelo was being prepared for a role greater than herself, one that demanded obedience, endurance, and silence. Wealth, instead of bringing freedom, became a tool of discipline. By her teenage years, Consuelo had learned to perform perfection while feeling almost nothing inside. She obeyed because resistance seemed pointless, and because she had never been taught that her own desires mattered. To outsiders, she appeared composed, elegant, privileged. But inside she was like a masterpiece, locked in a frame, endlessly admired, yet never allowed to move. For years, Consuelo walked the path that had been laid out for her. Then quietly, almost without permission, she made a choice of her own. And it was the most forbidden choice of all. A first love suffocated a commercial marriage disguised as a fairy tale. Consuelo was astonishingly beautiful, and before she had even reached the end of her teenage years, she had already received proposals from nearly every man who met her. But to the ambitious Alva, only a prince or a duke was worthy of marrying her daughter, only someone capable of elevating the Vanderbilt dynasty, whether Consuelo wanted it or not. During her debutante season, Consuelo met and fell in love with Winthrop Rutherford, a young man whose social standing in New York was equal to even slightly higher than that of the Vanderbilts. But he was not a prince or a duke, and Consuelo was terrified that her mother would discover the relationship. Right after her 18th birthday, Consuelo made the boldest act of rebellion of her life up to that point. She met Winthrop during a bicycle outing along with her mother and a few friends in Riverside Park, Manhattan. But when the two slipped away from the group, Winthrop quickly and secretly proposed, and she accepted. If it sounds like they were rushing, it was because they truly had no time left. The very next day, the young girl had to leave for Europe on a long trip with her mother, outwardly to broaden her horizons, but in reality to hunt for a titled husband. Undeterred, Winthrop promised he would follow her to Europe and elope with her once they returned. Consuelo spent months enjoying European hospitality, moving from tea parties to meetings with dukes and princes. But after 5 months, her fiancé had not appeared, had not written, had not called, had done nothing to keep the promise they had made. Only later did she learn what had happened. Winthrop had indeed followed her to Europe and had even tracked her down in Paris. But Consuelo could not outmaneuver her mother. Alva quickly understood everything and refused to let Winthrop near her daughter. When he wrote desperate letters, she intercepted and destroyed them all. What followed was not an argument or a negotiation, but a carefully calculated campaign of psychological pressure. Consuelo was isolated, confined, and repeatedly told that her disobedience would destroy the family. By 19, she received 2 or 3 more proposals from different English men, but none of them truly loved her. They were only after her dowry. Then they spent a weekend at Blenheim Palace, the ancestral home of the Marlborough family. There, Mrs. Vanderbilt found the high-ranking bachelor she had been searching for, Charles Spencer Churchill. He was handsome in a bland way, reasonably intelligent, reasonably decent, but nothing more. Yet, the Duke was hiding a dark secret. When he inherited his title 2 years earlier, he discovered he was nearly bankrupt. In a bitter twist of history, it was the Duke who was now hunting her money, and her mother Alva could not have been happier. And Marlborough found a bride who possessed what he desperately needed: money, the thing that would secure the survival of Blenheim. So much so that he ended his relationship with an English woman he had long been deeply in love with. That very afternoon, he must have decided to marry me and give up the girl he loved, as he told me tragically soon after our wedding, Consuelo wrote. For to live at Blenheim in the luxury and ceremony he considered essential required money. And do you wonder how much money he received for this marriage? Exactly in the agreement between Vanderbilt and Marlborough, the Duke would receive $100,000 per year, about $3.2 million today. He also received $2.5 million in railroad stocks, which adjusted for inflation would be roughly $81 million. Meanwhile, Consuelo also received a substantial allowance. Consuelo tried to resist her mother's wishes. She confronted her at their Newport home, where Alva forbade her from receiving guests for fear they might secretly pass messages from Rutherford. Alva even staged a serious illness, making her daughter believe she could be the cause of her mother's death. But the coldest move was saved for last. Alva warned that Rutherford's life could be in danger if the relationship continued. Heartbroken and cornered, Consuelo agreed to the engagement. She became the most prominent example of what are now called dollar princesses, wealthy American heiresses who married British aristocrats. They gained social power and titles. In return, the men received large dowries often used to maintain their estates. On November 6, 1895, Consuelo's nightmare finally became reality. Consuelo and the Duke were married at St. Thomas Church on Fifth Avenue in New York City. Her mother watched her closely in the moments before the ceremony in case she tried to run away. I spent the morning of my wedding in tears and alone. No one came near me. A servant was stationed at my door, and even my maid was not allowed in. The ceremony was delayed 20 minutes because Consuelo cried so much that her eyes were swollen. Consuelo's honeymoon had barely begun when the Duke of Marlborough made a shocking confession. With characteristic coldness, he admitted plainly that he had married her only to save Blenheim, his ancestral estate. Not only that, he stated clearly that he was in love with another woman and had no intention of building any emotional relationship with Consuelo, except to produce an heir. She moved across the Atlantic to live with the Duke. There she found English society rigid and outdated. She wrote about the deep-rooted contempt in English society toward Americans like her, whom they saw as newly rich. She found the weather bleak and realized that she and her husband were incompatible.
Magnificence.
Not long after she gave birth to her first son, John Spencer Churchill. One might think that after fulfilling her duty, Consuelo could live a quiet and private life. But reality was the complete opposite, an escape that lasted more than a decade. Everything began with an invitation from high society. Gladys Deacon, an up-and-coming American girl, managed to get herself invited to Blenheim and quickly became a close friend of both the Duke and Consuelo. But Gladys was already known as a rebellious young woman, and things quickly spun out of control.
The tower room.
Before long, Gladys had completely taken Consuelo's place at Blenheim, and she and the Duke began an affair that lasted more than a decade. In truth, Consuelo was not all that troubled by her husband having someone else, because she herself was not faithful either, and one of her first affairs caused quite a scandal. After a painful period of back and forth, she finally returned to Winthrop Rutherford, not long after getting married. In 1898, Consuelo gave birth to her second son, Lord Ivor Spencer Churchill, officially completing her duty by giving her husband an heir and a backup. Many believed that Ivor was actually Winthrop's son because the boy looked almost nothing like the Duke or his older brother. For a brief time, it seemed Consuelo might finally get her happy ending with Winthrop. He proposed again and suggested they run away together. Consuelo immediately went back and confessed everything to her husband, hoping that at last she might be free. The Duke, indifferent to the outcome, even allowed her to meet Winthrop again and decide for herself. But the next day, when Consuelo ran to the man she loved, hoping for a new future, she was met with a cruel betrayal. Winthrop had changed his mind and gave one of the worst possible reasons for refusing marriage. He said he was too attached to her to run away with her. Heartbroken, Consuelo returned to her husband in defeat. Even though she had no feelings for the Duke, Consuelo seemed to become attached to his bloodline itself. While her husband was away fighting in the Boer War, she began a relationship with his cousin Freddie Guest, who was staying at Blenheim at the time. By then, Consuelo had given up hope of escaping her marriage. The only option she had left was to hurt her husband in whatever way she could. When the Duke returned, she coldly informed him that she had slept with his cousin and never wanted him to enter her bedroom again. Throughout the marriage, Consuelo had relationships with no fewer than 3 of the Duke's cousins, horrifying the distinguished Spencer Churchill family. In some ways, this pattern of behavior felt like a desperate cry for help from the loveless prison in which she was trapped. When Consuelo married into the Spencer Churchill family, she accidentally changed the course of history itself. Before she gave the Duke a son, the nearest heir to Blenheim had been his cousin Winston Churchill. Because of the birth of Consuelo's son, Winston was freed from the duty of inheritance and was able to pursue politics, something for which he was always grateful to her. The two later became close friends. In 1906, Consuelo Vanderbilt shocked the world when she and her husband separated. After a decade of extreme suffering, it was still something rarely seen among the aristocracy. Separation was one thing, but Consuelo and the Duke also wanted a divorce. The legal battle dragged on for years and was exhausting, even though both believed it was the right thing to do. It was during one such court proceeding that Consuelo's mother, Alva, made a shocking confession. After her daughter separated, that domineering mother underwent a strange transformation and became an activist for women's suffrage. Although this was fairly ironic given her past, it seemed to come from guilt. In court, Alva admitted that she had forced Consuelo into that marriage and pleaded with the judge to grant a divorce to a marriage clearly created under coercion. The first taste of freedom. In 1921, after more than 20 years, trapped in a marriage born of ambition, duty, and silence, Consuelo finally gained what had been stolen from her youth, the right to choose for herself. On July 4th of that year, before the ink on her divorce from the Duke of Marlborough had even dried, she immediately married again, this time to Jacques Balsan, a calm French aviator who had cared for her for a very long time. Balsan had loved Consuelo from the first time he met her when she was not yet 18, when she was still just a young girl being moved around like a chess piece amid the calculations of family and society. That love was not loud, and it was not forceful. It quietly remained waiting until Consuelo could truly choose. That is why this second marriage was completely different from the first. It was no longer an exchange between money and title. This time, there were no crowds packed outside the door, no mother standing behind the curtain, pulling the strings, and no feeling that a door was closing. There were only two adults finding each other by their own will. She did not enter this marriage as a decorative object or a social symbol. She entered it as a woman finally allowed to live by her own decisions. The life Consuelo built with Jacques Balsan clearly reflected that change. After years of being surrounded by ritual, by long, cold hallways, and by huge rooms with no warmth in them, she stepped into a rhythm of life that was steadier, calmer, and more human. A home was no longer a place where she had to obey layers of rigid rules, nor a space built to impress high society. It became a place shaped by taste, routine, and the feeling of ease she wanted to keep for herself. Gardens, conversations, and living spaces marked by personal touches gradually replaced the atmosphere of an aristocratic museum. Put simply, for the first time in her life, Consuelo was living in a real home. That piece also changed her role as a mother. Before that, in the world of the English aristocracy, even motherhood was divided up by ritual, by nannies, and by a distance considered proper. But in this stage of life, Consuelo became closer to her children, more active and more natural with them. She no longer had to see motherhood through the lens of bloodline duty or ceremony. She was able to live it as a normal part of her life. That matters because it shows that freedom is not only leaving a wrong marriage. Freedom is also the ability to rebuild relationships that were once distorted by status, by control, and by cold social rules. In 1953, Consuelo published her memoir, The Glitter and the Gold. That book was not an act of revenge, nor an attempt to smear the past in order to buy sympathy. It was a clear-eyed reflection, a way for her to reclaim ownership of her own life story after decades of having others tell it for her, decide for her, and define her for her. In a world where the press had once turned her into the bride of the century, into a dollar princess, into a symbol of the marriage between American money and an English title, that memoir allowed Consuelo to speak in her own voice. Not harshly, not loudly, but very clearly. And it was that calmness that gave the book its weight. Behind the polite voice, readers could still clearly see the many years of control, manipulation, and confinement in a loveless marriage. The way she told it, restrained but never evasive, was enough to make people understand that some wounds leave no bruises on the skin, yet quietly shape an entire human destiny. The book therefore did more than help the public see Consuelo differently. It also helped her step out of the old role history had once forced her to wear. After everything, Consuelo continued her charitable work throughout the final years of her life. That was not to polish her name, but because she had turned the discipline that once imprisoned her into the strength to help others. She understood what helplessness felt like, understood what it meant to be stripped of the right to choose, so the compassion inside her was no longer a trait to be displayed. It became action. Losses still came, including the death of her son. But unlike in her youth, those tragedies no longer swallowed Consuelo's identity whole. They were part of her life, but no longer the whole of who she was. And that may have been her quietest, yet deepest victory. After all the years of being priced, arranged, and used as a symbol, Consuelo Vanderbilt finally became the true owner of her own life. The final years of her life. If Consuelo Vanderbilt's youth was the part of her life shaped by other people's decisions, then her final years carried the exact opposite meaning. They were the years in which she was finally able to live as herself. No longer the girl forced into a marriage for money and status, Consuelo, in the last stretch of her life, appeared as a woman who had already passed through nearly everything that hurt the most, understood the value of peace, and knew what she wanted to hold on to for the rest of her days. But that part of her life did not become peaceful on its own. It was paid for through many losses, especially the great shock that came in 1956 when she nearly lost the last two pillars of her life within a short span of time. That September, her younger son, Lord Ivor Spencer Churchill, died in London at the age of 57. For Consuelo, this shock was not only the pain of a mother losing a child, it was also a cold reminder that no matter how many storms a person has already survived, no one is ever truly prepared for loss. Losing him left a deep emptiness. But the cruel part was that she had almost no time to recover. Less than 2 months later, in early November 1956, Jacques Balsan, her second husband, also died at the age of 88 at their home in New York. The man who had once given her choice gentleness and the feeling of being allowed to live like an ordinary human being also left her life. For many people, 2 losses in a row like that would have been enough to collapse whatever remained of their life. But what makes Consuelo memorable is not that she did not hurt, but the way she endured that pain without allowing it to swallow her whole. After the death of her younger son and her second husband, she did not turn herself into a symbol of tragedy. On the contrary, Consuelo kept her life moving with a calm rhythm. She continued to live in the way she and Jacques had built many years earlier, private, orderly, unshowy, and no longer ruled by empty rituals. When she was young, she was pushed along by other people's will. In old age, even in grief, she was still the one holding the wheel of her own life. In the years after 1956, Consuelo lived more quietly, but she did not withdraw from a meaningful life. She still cared about charity and practical work. This was not the kind of charity done to polish a name. It felt more like a natural part of who she was. After too many years of living under control, she understood the feelings of vulnerable people, of those pushed by circumstances or social structures into places where they had no power to choose for themselves. So, in the final stretch of her life, compassion in her was no longer a virtue to be displayed, but a way of being. She simply continued to do it as a habit of dignity. Another striking thing is that Consuelo did not allow the past to become a second prison. She had more than enough reason to be bitter toward her mother, toward the aristocracy, toward her first marriage, and even toward the society that had once looked at her as a transaction made of diamonds. But the older she got, the more measured her way of looking back became. Her memoir, The Glitter and the Gold, published in 1953, is the clearest proof of that. It was not an angry indictment. It was a clear-eyed reflection, a way of reclaiming her life story in her own voice. Through that book, readers understand that behind Consuelo's politeness were many years of being shaped, controlled, and confined in a marriage without warmth. But what gives the book its weight is not that she tells a tale of suffering, but that she tells it like someone who has lived through everything and no longer needs to shout to prove that her pain was real. Consuelo's final years were tied to Southampton, Long Island, New York. It was a fitting place for the ending of her life, private, quiet, and far enough from the world that once viewed women as tools for family ambition. It was at her home in Southampton that on December 6, 1964, Consuelo died at the age of 87. She passed away in the stillness of old age. Afterward, she was buried at St. Martin's Church in Blaydon, Oxfordshire, beside her younger son Ivor, not far from Blenheim, the place that had once been the grandest gilded cage of her life. If you look closely, Consuelo's final years were not a sad ending, but the right ending. After the death of her younger son and her second husband, she kept living, kept her own rhythm, kept doing good, and kept the calm she had paid such a high price to gain. When she died in 1964, Consuelo was no longer the 17-year-old girl walking into a wedding in fear. She was a woman who had lived long enough to rewrite the final chapter of her life with serenity, self-possession, and dignity. The legacy of Consuelo Vanderbilt, an endlessly inspiring model. Consuelo Vanderbilt's greatest legacy does not lie in the fortune she was born to inherit, nor in the title of Duchess that society once saw as the most glorious destination of her life. What keeps Consuelo remembered lies elsewhere. She became the image of a woman who stepped out of the very system that had imprisoned her, then used the rest of her life to prove that a person's true worth does not lie in the family name they carry, the marriage they enter, or the gaze society forces upon them. It lies in the ability to reclaim one's own voice, rewrite one's own story, and live long enough and steadily enough to turn a planned fate into a life with meaning of its own. When people look back at that life, they do not only see a Vanderbilt girl forced by her mother to marry the Duke of Marlborough in exchange for a title for the family. They also see a familiar pattern repeated across generations. A girl taught that she must be beautiful, obedient, and perfectly shaped, must become the pride of her family before she is ever allowed to become herself. That is why Consuelo's story still carries weight. What is inspiring about Consuelo is not the loud kind of rising above, nor a blazing act of rebellion designed to satisfy the crowd's imagination. Her greatest lesson lies in a quieter, slower, but more durable kind of strength. She did not blow everything apart in a single night. She endured, observed, accumulated, and then gradually expanded space for herself. Not everyone has the chance to leave right away. Not everyone has the right to rebel exactly when they want to. Many times, courage begins with keeping the core of yourself from being completely distorted, then waiting for the right moment to step out. Consuelo is exactly that kind of model. Her legacy also lies in the way she redefined the meaning of victory. By the old social standard, Consuelo's victory should have been the wedding of the century, the saving of Blenheim Palace, the crown Alva Vanderbilt had always longed for. But her life proved the opposite. The most dazzling things are sometimes the most expensive price of all. What deserves to be called a true victory came only when she was able to live in peace, to be loved in a way that was not negotiated, to do charitable work by choice, and to tell the past in her own voice. In other words, Consuelo teaches people that success is not always the thing the crowd cheers for. Many times, success is the day you no longer have to live by a script written by someone else. She also left behind a very modern lesson in dignity. After everything she had been through, Consuelo did not turn herself into a person who lived only through resentment. She did not deny the pain, but she also did not allow the pain to become her entire identity. That restraint is exactly what made her image endure more strongly than many figures of her era. People may forget the lavish parties, the old headlines, or the aristocratic rituals that once surrounded her. But it is very hard to forget a woman who passed through control, a loveless marriage, family loss, and social pressure, and still kept enough calm to keep moving forward. So when people speak of Consuelo Vanderbilt, the most memorable thing is not who she once was in an American family tree or the British aristocracy. The most memorable thing is who she became after everything. From a girl treated like a bargaining tool, she became a woman with a voice, with choices, with compassion, and with the ability to define her own worth. That is why Consuelo's legacy still has life in it. She did not just leave behind a sad story about a gilded cage. She left behind a very real example of how far a human being can go if they are strong enough not to abandon themselves in any era.
This content is for informational and entertainment purposes only. thoughtfully compiled from public archives, historical records, and classic articles. While we strive for accuracy and balanced storytelling, some details from Hollywood's golden age remain unconfirmed and should be treated as speculative. We encourage viewers to draw their own independent conclusions. If this journey through Hollywood's shadows resonated with you, please leave a gentle like and subscribe with the bell icon so you never miss our next chapter. To continue uncovering the forgotten tragedies of the Golden Age, simply select the video on your screen right now. Thank you for keeping their memories alive.